You saw the title and thumbnail. I know, hot take, right? But before you start slinging the tomatoes at me, hear me out. Clair Obscur was an amazing game that got everyone excited, and rightly so. It was fun, beautiful, and had a great story, and was priced very well. But whenever there's excitement, there's also a little bit of losing sight of reality. People are giving it hype catchphrases like, saviors of the industry, triple A's are scared. More games should be like this. I mean, that one's true, but there's more to it than that too. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think the reality of video game development is a lot grimmer than most people think. Let me start by saying this isn't going to be a hit piece on the game nor its devs. As we've said time and time again, we love the game and a lot of people feel the same. This is a video addressing the audience of Clair Obscur. Yes, you. And honestly, the good majority of gamers as well. The main thing I want people to take away from this video is that these rose-tinted glasses that some people view Clair Obscur with are not only filled with misinformation, but also undermine the Herculean task that it took to create a well-loved, beautiful game like it. First off, there are a few things that we need to set straight with Sandfall's Underdog story. One is that Sandfall is totally new. Yes, this is indeed Sandfall's first game. Yes, a lot of their staff are young talents, some of them their first time working on a game. However, if we look at the two people who are spearheading this project, they're pretty experienced, and leadership makes a huge difference. Guillaume Broche and Tom Guillermin have worked at Ubisoft before. We all know this. Guillaume's resume is particularly interesting as he went from an assistant creative director at Ubisoft to an assistant brand manager at Microsoft before going back to Ubisoft again. My man literally said, "I've gone soft too many times. It's time to go hard." This shows that Guillaume has a lot of experience and has what it takes to lead these people. And even lead writer, Jennifer Svedberg Yen, comments that he had a knack for finding really cool people. His stint at Microsoft is worth noting because I think whatever connections he made there might have been crucial to getting that Microsoft partnership and that spot at Xbox Showcase back in 2024, which first introduced Clair Obscur Expedition 33 to the world and was crucial to drumming up the huge hype for it. Now, onto the others who worked on the game. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 was not made by just 30-ish people. Sandfall's employee count may be around the 30s, but a quick count of the people in the credits will prove that more than just 30 people worked on Clair Obscur. I made a spreadsheet and manually listed almost everyone on the credits, barring double, triple duty credits and not counting the voice actors. I'm assuming that everyone in the main credits are direct Sandfall employees, and I counted around 42 of them. 42. That's pretty near 30, right? So what? That's not the whole credits yet. We still have the animation work that they outsourced from Korea. Animation is one of the big things that this game was praised for, so we can't forget that. Add 8 to my 42 count. Localization teams. The majority of the world won't be able to play the game if it was all in French after all. Add 30 people. Audio. Holy f***, the game's audio design and music was amazing. The head composer from SoundCloud isn't the only one working on this game's captivating music and its impactful audio design. Add 68 people. And of course, we can't forget the QA and testing team that helped Sandfall make sure that this game was working well and as intended. I don't think we need to further explain why QA is important. Add 76 people. So that's not everyone in the credits, but that still amounts to 224 people. Oh, wait. 225. Can't forget Monoko the dog, clearly the most important Sandfall employee. Yes, compared to AAA games, that's still teeny tiny, with some AAAs having 3,000 or more people working on them. But compared to the original 30 that some people claim, it's still 225 divided by 30, roughly 7.5 times more. Okay, but surely 225 is a normal amount of credit for indie games. Well, let's look at one of the most popular indie games in the last few years, Stardew Valley. That game only has 26 credits, with most of those being translation. Celeste had 63 people. Hollow Knight had 85. Undertale, 40. For a closer comparison, Hades had about 170 people on its credits. and Divinity Original Sin 2 had 447. Yes, there's a discussion of whether Original Sin 2 is indie because of the size and scope of the project, but it was crowdfunded and they didn't rely on publisher funds, so let's just leave it at that, at least for the sake of this video. Well, 225, that makes sense. Compared to the others on the list, Clair Obscur is more graphically intensive and has more bells and whistles like full voice acting, so it makes sense to have a bigger team. Yes, that's true. But remember that the problem here is wrongly attributing that amazing work to just a teeny tiny group of 30. Even Matt Handrahan, portfolio director of Kepler, Clair Obscur's publisher, thought that people kind of fixated on that number and acknowledges that they had a galaxy of partners revolving around the project. We have to set proper expectations for the amount of work it takes to make games like this. These games just don't poof out of thin air after all, but I'm sure you're already aware of that. But to further hammer in the hardships that games worthy of being called saviors of the industry go through, let's look at another company that came from humble beginnings to eventually being hailed as saviors of the industry today, Larian Studios. Larian Studios started game development way back in the late 90s, with their first game being a little different from what we'd expect from Larian today. It was an RTS that kinda looks like it could pass for a Command and Conquer game. However, it was after making this one that they made the franchise that would eventually become their bread and butter, Divine Divinity. The first two games, Divine Divinity and Beyond Divinity, looked way different from the Divinity we know today. They were action RPGs that looked more like Diablo. Following those games was Divinity 2, Ego Draconis, looking more like Fable or early Witcher. Between Divinity 2 and Divinity Original Sin is when things get interesting, at least for the purposes of this video. Divinity 2 sold poorly and was deemed okay by reviewers. It could have maybe done better if they had enough time and money to implement some of their cooler ideas they initially planned to have. You'd think okay is fine, but you see, Divinity 2 left Larian in debt, and okay wasn't an option. So they really had to put their entire pussy into the next one or else it's over. And so their game plan was to create the game of their dreams, making something they've wanted to make all this time but couldn't because of difficulty or time constraints or technological constraints. But despite already being in debt, they borrowed even more money, got investors, and gathered $1 million worth of Kickstarter money. With all the ingredients in place, they stepped into the proverbial kitchen and started to cook, and got their Michelin star masterpiece. Development was a grueling battle, with them sacrificing another game they had in development alongside Original Sin, Divinity Dragon Commander. Funds were reallocated from Dragon Commander to Original Sin, leading the former to be released in an unsatisfactory state, at least according to Larian CEO Sven Vincke himself. But that sacrifice would prove to be the smart choice, as Divinity Original Sin turned out to be the turn-based RPG that turned things around for Larian. It was highly praised for its complex battle system, its heavy roleplay focused story, enjoyable multiplayer, and the intriguing lore of its world. It was released in June 2014, sold 160,000 copies in a week, and 500,000 copies just after a few months. Now that doesn't sound like much, but to a Larian who was in dire straits, it was like an angel descended from the heavens to booming fanfare and ray-traced light effects. Its success eventually led them to making a sequel, Divinity Original Sin 2, which saw even greater success, selling 700,000 copies in a month and 1 million 2 months after release. This then, of course, eventually led to Baldur's Gate 3, and I don't think we even have to expound on how successful that was.
What else did I expect?
Okay, so why did we go through all that trouble to provide a short history of Larian? Again, it's to illustrate the hardships that go into game development. Sure, we saw them pull through, but even they went through a really rough patch. They could have definitely sunk during the development of Divinity Original Sin. Thankfully though, the Original Sin series was a great hit among CRPG enthusiasts. But if we zoom out, leave the CRPG bubble for a bit, even though the Divinity Original Sin series was so good, it never really hit mainstream popularity. Larian wasn't really a well-known name until after Baldur's Gate 3. This was evidenced by people asking, what will Larian do if they're not making Baldur's Gate 4? Back when that news hit. For people who knew of Larian's work, obviously, they'll go back to making stuff like Divinity. The fact that I saw this kind of comment a fair number of times enough to remember it until now tells me they're really well known just for Baldur's Gate, outside of certain niches. So this really puts into perspective how much of a miracle Sandfall has managed to pull off. Larian's been around for years, made multiple games, found their magic formula in the form of Divinity Original Sin, and still didn't make it to the same level of publicity and fanfare that Clair Obscur did until Baldur's Gate 3. And it's this perception from gamers that, oh, they put together this amazing game with just 30 people. This game is made by a ragtag bunch of folks, they just hobbled together online. That doesn't do justice to the amount of raw hard work, connections, and massive luck, to quote Guillaume himself, that was needed to make this project a success that it became. And when developers say it takes massive luck, I really feel like we need to take them seriously and not just take it as a throwaway, humble statement. They really mean it. All this emphasis on Sandfall's underdog story gives the general public this illusion that anybody with a passion and an idea can pull off being a Clair Obscur, and I really don't think that's true. Let's look at one post on Blue Sky that said, "The making of Clair Obscur Expedition 33 could be made into its own movie." Led by a former bored Ubisoft dev, team was almost all junior devs, writer found on Reddit, composer was found on SoundCloud, and it all came together beautifully. I think this sums up the romanticization that most people view Clair Obscur with. And this was quote posted by Rami Ismail saying, "If there were no NDAs all around, I could tell you about 20 projects in the last 5 years alone that followed these exact steps except for, and it all came together beautifully."
Beautiful is a word that one could use.
If anything can be learned here, it's not that they found a writer on a writing site and a musician on a music site. And for those who don't know, Rami Ismail is a fairly big name in the indie game dev scene, as he was recognized by the Game Developers Choice Awards and GameIndustry.biz for helping support game devs in developing countries. He was at one point deemed by Variety as a highly influential person in the gaming space for creating free tools for independent creators, so he probably knows a thing or two. But let's not take his word for it. While we can't ever know what games Rami Ismail was talking about because of NDAs, we can still take a look at some games that follow the "we used to be part of insert big game company here, and we want to pursue our own ideas" path. Stormgate is a game made by former Blizz devs Tim Morton and Tim Campbell. Morton was the production lead for StarCraft 2, while Campbell was Warcraft 3 The Frozen Thrones campaign leader. They released Stormgate's early access last year, July, and, well, they're struggling to keep player attention. And their early access didn't get that much attention to begin with at 4,400 peak players. Boundless is a Minecraft voxel type MMO from former Lionhead and EA devs. It's got mostly positive reviews from Steam, but hardly anyone knows about it, only having 1,600 total reviews on Steam and only 1,100 peak when it came out of early access in 2018. It's got 20 people playing it sometimes today, which is hardly massively multiplayer. Unruly Heroes is a 2D side-scroller action game made by former Ubisoft developers that released back in 2019. But have you heard of it? I'm guessing not, because the all-time peak for this game is 173. Alex Hutchinson, creative director for Assassin's Creed 3 and Far Cry 4, put up his own studio to try to capture the extinct mid-range gaming market. Maybe it's worth noting that Kepler Interactive also has this as their goal today. Hutchinson's studio was called Typhoon Studio, and they made Journey to the Savage Planet, which was average in terms of both critic and player reviews. But that studio shut down around 2021, although Hutchinson did create Raccoon Studios to try again shortly after. We also have a video showing various games with unresolved cliffhangers that could possibly never be continued as an example of how much things can just not go as planned in game development, if you want to check that one out. Heck, if you want to observe the difficulties of getting a game up and running, go to itch.io right now. Pick maybe 5 random games in development or have very early demos that interest you. Watch them over a few years. Which of them will continue to a full release? I'm sure some of them will be lucky to even get a Steam page up or even early access. Most of these games don't even have the grand scale that Clair Obscur has, and they still experience difficulties. Whenever gamers look at Clair Obscur saying, "It's their first game and they were able to be so successful, more games need to be like Clair Obscur," I suspect they don't know how much of a Herculean task that is. They believe the made by 30 people myth and think it's easy to shit out a game, but really, they don't see the whole picture. It's a classic example of survivorship bias.
Was our entire team dying part of that optimal result?
Remember that scene in the beginning where Gustav sits down next to the piles of past expeditioners' bodies? Poetically, Gustav represents Expedition 33, and every body behind him, well, we don't even know their names. Gamers right now are looking at the immense success of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, while all the while unaware of the many corpses of unsuccessful, or more often, unfinished projects that are right behind them. So, why is it so hard for independent creators to make their dreams come true? Well, it's a very complicated, multifaceted situation that we can only hope to touch on a little in this video. There are a lot of hurdles on the dev side.
Still too far.
According to this presentation from Matthew Ball, big releases happen more often each year, and most of them also release quite near each other, and they all fight for very limited attention. I mean, I even said in our Clair Obscur review that I was really worried that Oblivion would overshadow it at some point, and I'm glad it didn't. You also see a lot of the best-selling games are usually all the same games. Looking at you, Call of Duty. Discoverability on Steam, one of the most discover-friendly platforms, is also at a low. Anecdotally, I can explain this with, my backlog is huge so I should stop buying games I won't play. Sure, discoverability is high, but that also contributes to overspending and having a huge backlog that you realize you should clear out before buying new stuff. At least in my experience. The same big games also dominate engagement for a long time. Your Fortnites, Valorants, Counter-Strikes, Dotas, and LOLs. Other than these, just the economic situation of gamers is also a factor. Prices for a lot of basic needs like food, home, transportation, education are all getting pricier. It's kinda hard to have fun with video games when your basic needs aren't being met, unless you're crazy and have your priorities all out of whack. I mean, hell, this applies to devs trying to chase their dreams too. Kinda hard to make art when you're, struggling to live. And this is why I think AAAs are not scared. They have way more resources than these smaller devs. They know how hard it is to make it, and they know games like Clair Obscur are once-in-a-generation miracles. I know I'm painting a pretty grim picture, and reality kinda is, to be honest, but it doesn't mean that games like these are doomed because obviously we have Clair Obscur. Outlast was also ex-Ubisoft devs and was a pretty successful horror game. There are upcoming games from former big company devs also trying to make their big break. We have Atlantis Studio, made up of former Ubisoft, Ready at Dawn, and Midgard devs. They don't have a game yet as they just announced their formation just a while ago. There are former EA devs who formed Play-by-Play Studios and are making a spiritual successor to NBA Street called The Run God Next. Former BioWare EA devs forming an indie studio to make ARPG Cloudheim. Another set of ex-Blizzard game devs also coming out with Wildgate soon too. And of course, we wish them all the best, especially because we saw just how hard it is to make a successful game. How is this hump in the gaming industry going to be solved? Well, I'm just a rando on the internet. I don't have the answers nor the means to fix this mess. Like I said, it's multifaceted, and a lot of societal and economic problems are tied to it. At the same time, I don't think a single game like Clair Obscur and even Baldur's Gate 3 can take this on by themselves. However, from what I see, not one entity can change things. There needs to be changes in a lot of stages of game development. It's not just the developers themselves who need to do the work, publishers like Kepler who are okay with funding projects, while giving devs creative freedom are also needed. With creation tools becoming more accessible, the burden on developers is also lightening. And of course, we, the consumers, should also be there supporting them when we can, whether through crowdfunding, buying, or just word-of-mouth recommendations and wishlisting on Steam. But honestly, consumer support is probably the hardest thing to get out of all of these. Again, this isn't a hit piece on Clair Obscur nor its devs. It's more of addressing the unreasonable expectations that the myths surrounding the game's development have cultivated. We're happy to see some devs are now lucky enough to see their vision come to life. While I do agree with Sven Vinke's speech during last year's The Game Awards, that what makes a good game is developers having fun, feeling inspired, believing and having passion for their work. The sad reality is that you need more than that to make it. Though I'm sure he knows that reality very well, as his own studio almost didn't make it. Heck, even the Sandfall devs themselves have acknowledged how mind-bogglingly lucky they are. It's good that games like Clair Obscur are allowing us to dream of a better future for the gaming industry, but we also need to think about our expectations realistically. I think it's unfair to look at one miraculously exceptional game and think that it'll shift the bell curve drastically to its side. I don't think that's how the world works. If a shift does occur, I think it'll come with time. A lot of time. Maybe by the time The Elder Scrolls 6 or Beyond Good and Evil 2 are out. Thanks for watching our video. That was a long discussion, but I hope it gave you something to think about. Go out and appreciate your local indie dev. Honestly, appreciate any game for somehow existing in a world that seemingly doesn't want them to exist. Like if you like. Subscribe for more video game related content. This has been Game 8. We hope to see you in the next video.